lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring.
Joining me now, I have two people that have ran for political office in the state of New York. I thought it would be good to get perspective from these two candidates. Joining me, I have Kim Council. Kim Council, she ran for Brooklyn Borough President. And I also have Joycelyn Taylor. Joycelyn Taylor has run for NYC mayor. Thanks for being here.
Having us.
Yes, now I wanted to for the people out there to know, to take away a few things about running for a political office. Joycelyn, what was your biggest takeaway in running for a political office like that?
Well, my biggest takeaway, I don't know if it's a takeaway or not, but one of the things that you learn when you actually run from office is just how challenging it really is. Somebody told me before I decided to run that if you run for office, you're going to experience every emotion there is. And some days you'll experience all of those emotions at the same time. And I have to say, throughout this experience, I definitely have to say that, the advice that they told me or the information that they gave me was correct. When you're running for office, it's very much about, you pouring into other people. And, it's a lot. It's very challenging. It's also very rewarding. So the biggest takeaway that I think I have from it is to make sure that if you do it, no matter what the results are, to stick with it. It's about winning, but it's also about finishing.
Wow. Kim, same question.
Well, this is not the first time that I've run for office, so I knew going in what it was going to entail. But I think the best thing, the thing that is running for office is an interruption of everything in your life. So you have to be prepared financially. You have to be prepared emotionally and physically. It's a physical strain. As Joycelyn shared, you go through a whole range of emotions. You have to have the right kind of support in place, and you have to be prepared. Because it will challenge you at every single level, and it'll have you questioning all kinds of things. There were many days when I woke up and asked the question, "What am I doing?" You need to understand the process, and you need to understand what it is that you're taking on before you take it on, because as I said, it's an interruption of your entire life.
One of the things I would imagine, just from, sometimes I just listen to what people have to say about politics, and for the viewers that look at politics that don't observe it often, I think there's a question. So I'm going to ask this question. Why is it that the tax money that, let's say, New Yorkers, let's keep it to the state, the tax money that the New Yorkers pay all the time, right? We pay taxes. We go to the store. Everywhere we go, we pay taxes. Why do people who are running for office have to ask the general public to support them? Why isn't that support taken out of tax money that New Yorkers already pay?
Well, it is taken out. The matching funds is a subsidy for the race. But I mean, I think that we do have to have some type of how can I say this? you have to have some there has to be, I mean, like, there are things that you have to do in order to run the race. I mean, like, just like running a business or running a church or running a household, you can't do it for free. And there has to be some level of sacrifice on your part. So, I mean, to say that you want to give that full bill to the taxpayers without you making some type of financial sacrifice, going to the people who, and I mean, you have to have people who believe in you. You have to get people to vote for you. So if they're going to vote for you, why wouldn't they contribute and be a part of the process? So I think it's both and, not necessarily either or. So we do get, there is a taxpayer subsidy. We have an 8-to-1 match, which is very, very rare. That doesn't happen at the state level. And it doesn't happen in many other state races. There was $109 million that was poured into these last races between city council, borough president. So everybody was up for office, and there was a lot of taxpayer money that was spent on these campaigns.
And I think, but, I think also, though, part of it too is, especially like for the mayoral race, in order to qualify for matching funds, you had to raise $250,000. Right? I mean, because that's a huge race. And I understand what you're saying as it relates to, from the outside looking in as a taxpayer, you're saying, I'm already paying into the system. Why don't we just utilize those funds? But as Kim pointed out, there is that system. And, what people don't understand, and I think we have to have a conversation around this, because I also think that we're not going to change the dynamics about who is able to actually run for office and get the money that we need if we don't change the system. Because one of the things that I found within my own race is that especially if you're looking for people in marginalized communities, people who feel like, no matter what they do, that their voice is never heard, it's going to be really challenging to get them to dig into their pockets, even donate $10, right? They might support you, but it's going to be really challenging because, they can't see the value add. And a lot of times $10 might seem like it's a little bit, but it's a lot to them when they're trying to manage being able to pay rent, keeping food on the table, paying for childcare, and all of those other things. So while we do have the matching funds program, I do think there's opportunity for us to kind of continue to look at that and see how we can create changes so that we can level the playing field and have more grassroots candidates running for office and have more voices heard, even as it relates to who can get on the debate stage. I don't think that should be a dollar number, a dollar figure attached to that. People should hear from all of the candidates.
Could I ask a question that's kind of raw, but some people want to ask it? Is that to be able to run for office or to be able to stay in office, do you have to be a good fundraiser?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, hands down. Here's the thing, like, so the threshold for the mayoral race was very high, but you're running for 5 boroughs and 8 million people in the city of New York. So there's, and I mean, like, for the BP race, the threshold was like $50,094. Not an insignificant amount of money, as Joycelyn pointed out. But there are programs that people can sign up for that would help them, to train them how, if for women who are running, there's organizations like Run to Win. There's Emily's List, there's Eleanor's Legacy, there's the Working Families Party. There are all kinds of training classes that you can go to that would help you in that whole process of fundraising. And you can talk to someone who's in office and talk to them about their process because I don't think there's anybody who's run for office who just enjoys raising money.
No.
That was my least favorite part of campaigning, but it was necessary. It was very necessary. And I think that there have to be these thresholds that we meet, or these things that we do in order to qualify, in order to, to be a part of the process. You had 21 people that were running for mayor. We have 14 people that were running for borough president. And I think the difference between the race that we had this year, the primary, and the race that we had, as opposed to past years, we had all of these virtual spaces where people could come together. So there were a lot of opportunities, whether you met those thresholds and were getting matching funds or not, for you to get your voice out. But in order to run the type of campaign, the winning campaign, it boils down to the money. So I agree with you, Joycelyn, but I also, feel like there's some things that we can do. There's some resources that are out there that people can tap into that can help them to get to where they need to be in order to run an effective race.
Now, I do agree with that, but when you look at some of the candidates that are running that have been in office for years and years, prior, if you're coming in as a grassroots candidate, you're never going to be able to match or get to the same levels that they're at, right? Especially if they're still currently, they're coming into every race they go into with a war chest, right? From their previous races.
Some are, but look, we had Matthew Eugene in my race, who was like the longest serving city council member, and he didn't raise enough money to qualify for matching funds. He's been in city council for 12 years. He did not qualify for matching funds. He raised about, I think, $60,000, but he never met that threshold for BP. And so I mean, there are some seasoned politicians who fundraising is a challenge. And then you add on the fact that we were in the middle of a pandemic. There was a lot of different factors that were going on that helped were a hindrance to people being successful in their fundraising.
Yeah. But I think that, it's definitely something that I hope they continue to have conversations around, and there's definitely room for improvement.
Oh,
yeah. Do you know of an example of somebody not having an effective message, but they took it all the way? Is there anybody that you can remember that maybe
Donald Trump?
Yeah, Donald Trump.
So he had he
no message at all.
He had an extended amount of money, and he really, to me, he was just an absolute disaster. I mean, I couldn't even put my finger around any policy solution that he was talking about.
And his slogan wasn't even an original slogan.
That's right.
I mean, that was a slogan that Reagan had, and Bill Clinton actually used the same slogan, make America great again. That wasn't even an original thought he had.
Do you think realistically, do you think that a pointed message can break through to wherein it's enough money for a candidate to get his message across? In other words, if one has a great message, is that all you need, or where does it? In other words, I'm trying because there's a lot of people that want to run for office now. Why? Because they're seeing that there's a lot of people that are in office that's not meeting the people's needs. So my point is that where does the message wrap around with the money? In other words,
I think messaging is important. I think it's important that you're able to articulate, what you want to do, why you want to do it, and to inspire and excite the people. But I don't think that is like that's like the most important thing. I think that there's a series of things, or a whole bunch of things that have to come together to create that perfect storm. And then also, you have to, there's also a science. As much as I hate to admit it, as a political science major in undergrad, there is a science. And when you look at, like, you take the microcosm of Brooklyn, which is 2.8 million people, 2.6, 2.7 million people, 1.2 million registered Democrats. And of those 1.2 million registered Democrats, less than 300,000 of those voted in the primary. So there's a whole bunch of voter education that has to happen. Joycelyn talked earlier about the disengagement that a lot of people, particularly people who lived in underserved communities, there's a disconnect and a disengagement because they feel that the people who are in office, and so it creates this vicious cycle where you have the same people who get in office because they do the math, they figure out where the pockets of people are, they look at what's called double and triple prime voters, which are people who are likely to vote in a primary. And those are the people that they target. And So their messaging, and the messaging is not just what I say and how I express myself, but it's also your mail pieces. You know, how are you targeting specific audiences, and are you and then for some of our races we were able to I was able to do a commercial. There were some other people. So, and are you using social media platforms? Do you have the following? Do you have having the right message and not putting boots on the ground, or not having people or venues or spaces to get that message out, it's can be detrimental.
And I have to agree with that. And I think because of the virtual aspect due to the pandemic, that did provide a lot more opportunity. And a lot of times, especially, you know, I know with my race, there are instances that, you know, when you don't meet certain other thresholds, you don't even get an opportunity to get your message out. So you have to be utilizing all types of platforms, social media. You know, I did a lot of boots on the ground type of campaigning, and I thought that was really, really important. But I think part of, you know, you can have a message, but, you know, I think especially in underserved communities, because what Kim said about 1.2 million people being registered and only 300,000 voting is very telling, right? People don't feel inspired. So what's the message that will get people inspired? And I think that's what any candidate that is going into this has to think about. And it has to, you know, I say for myself, if I have just had the opportunity to have a few people who may not have been engaged before engaged, then I've won. And I think that's what, to me, what people who are looking to run to in office need to think about. And that's what they should, you know, focus on. But there is a lot of, you know, targeting as it relates to, you know, people who've done this forever are very specific, very specific. You know, people said to me when I was getting ready to run and I was talking about, you know, the constituents I wanted to represent, they out and out said to me, those people don't vote. Those people, you know, they've already done the demographics. Those people don't vote. Those people don't donate to campaigns. And that's why politicians continue to ignore them. So when we talk about messaging, that's the message we need to continue to get out and get those people to understand the significance of how they can actually create positive change.
How many people does one need to have a legitimate campaign in the state of New York?
Well, it depends on the race. Which race are you talking about?
Let's say for your race, Kim, how, you know, or even city council to start off with. So how many people does?
So in a typical city council district, you have about 160, 170,000 people in those districts, which you're going to have to look at. And you're talking about the people that you target, or you're talking about the actual operation of the campaign?
The operation of the campaign.
Okay. So looking at, so what one of the things you want to do, you want to look at, again, you have to identify your target. You have to identify who your target audience is. And you're not going to target the entire 167,000 people. You're going to look at who is a part of your party, because that's the primary that's coming up. And then of those people who are in that primary, who are the people who are most likely to go to the polls? So you have, like I said earlier, what are double and triple prime voters. And when I say prime, I mean people who have voted in the last 2 or the last 3 primary races, because you know that those are people who are engaged and who are going to pay attention and who are going to go out to vote. And as much as I would love to sit here and be idealistic and say, hey, no, we're going to get people excited and we're going to get them to the polls, the reality is that people are creatures of habit. And if they're engaged, they're going to remain engaged if they're not engaged. So typically you would look at, and then you look at the electoral districts. So you have the electoral districts, you have the assembly districts. Yeah, I mean, so everything is broken down into numbers. And so when I ran for city council, and I ran in 2013, I had about 30 canvassers. And that also had, I had a volunteer coordinator, I had field coordinator, I had a campaign manager. And so you have all of these different levels, and you have them out on the street knocking doors, and you have to touch people at least 3 to 6 times. 6 times is a good number of times to touch people. So you have to sit down and and look at the numbers, look at the people who vote. So you get access to what's called VAN, which is like the Voter Action Network, something like that. You get access to the VAN, you cut what's called turf, and you have to have somebody that knows how to cut that turf and give it to the canvassers. And so the canvassers will go out and they'll knock on doors. You as a candidate need to go out and knock on doors and hit train stations and make phone calls and go to events. So you have to find these pockets or spaces where where the people are going to be, and it's very, very difficult because demographics are shifting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
And I think, for a citywide race, I know most mayoral candidates, they had hundreds of people, volunteers, working with them on their campaigns in order to get out and get the message out and not knock on doors and that type of thing. I utilized the petitioning period as a good opportunity to make sure that I was out there doing a lot of the door knocking and talking to people personally, because I think that personal touch is important when you can provide it.
And I'm sorry, I just thought about something. So the canvas that I had was paid canvas. And so, but you also have to have volunteers. And that's the other thing that is a huge challenge. Getting people, to buy in enough to the campaign so that you can get people who you don't have to necessarily pay to get out and knock and get that message out. So you have to have a network, which is why the other thing that works for people who are already in office, many of them have political clubs. Mm-hmm. And those clubs bring their own networks. And so you just kind of spider out to touch as many people as you can in places as you can.
I don't know how many independents are in the state of New York, but just break down, how important is it to be associated with a party? Now, the reason why I asked that question is because there's so many people that look at politics, and one of the first things they usually say is, I wouldn't want to be a Democrat or Republican or independent. I want to be, and they, so how important is it to be with a party running for office?
Well, I think that, if you want to vote in the primary, it's important, right? Because in the primary elections, if you're not a Democrat, you can't vote for who the Democratic person is.
I'm sorry, Joycelyn. I'm talking about as a candidate.
So the reality is that, like, as much as we want to try to say that there's a multi-party system, there's really only two parties. There's Republicans and there's Democrats. And in the state of New York, Democrats have the majority, particularly downstate. Upstate, you might see a little bit more of the Republican Party. And I don't even want to get into that whole conversation about how the Republicans were able to keep control of the Senate through the prison industrial complex. But the reality is that downstate Democrats, you have Democratic governor, mayor, you got a Democratic, the city council is majority Democrat. Most of the people who win these local races, the borough presidents, the DAs, are members of the Democratic Party. So logic would say to you that if I want to be a part of change, that I need to be a part of the Democratic Party. It doesn't matter what your political ideology or your leanings are. If you want to have a say in who it is that represents you, because we still have a party system and we have primaries.
Because isn't it true that, as much as people don't talk about this, but isn't it true, like, let's say you become a president or you become a governor or one becomes that, you have to have friends that are willing to go to bat for you for a vote or down back.
But you can still be bipartisan and work across the aisle. I have a lot of friends who, as my neighbor is one is independent, one is libertarian. And I have some friends who are members of the Republican Party. So I don't think that we're not a monolith. We are not monolithic in nature. There are many different, like some of us are left leaning, some of us are moderate, some of us are conservative. But I think that you definitely want to be able to get stuff done and you want to be able to reach across the aisle. But the reality is that everybody, even within the Democratic Party, they don't fall into a box.
Yeah, I mean, Bernie Sanders was an independent, and to run for office, he did run as a Democrat. You know,
Listen, Eric Adams used to be a Republican, right?
Mm-hmm.
Things change.
right. You know, so I mean, that that got me.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Oh, really? I forgot my question after that. No, like because one of the things that I always tell people that, you know, there is if you have an agenda for the people, again, for the people, there's other people that you know that one person cannot get everything done sitting in office.
Exactly.
Right. So let me ask you a question, Joycelyn. Would you run for mayor again?
When I run for mayor again, you know, I think I'm too fresh off that old campaign to answer that question.
I don't know how you feel. Have you had a vacation? Have you taken any time?
You know, the reality of the situation is that I've tried to take time, but people keep reaching out to me about certain things. And my sister was saying to me today, I need to learn the word no.
Yeah, it is a complete sentence.
Right. So I feel like, you know, I'm trying to make sure that I get some time for myself, because I think that people don't realize how much you go through when you're on the campaign. And like with my campaign, I was doing it for almost like a year and a half. So that was really, really extensive period of time. So in this moment, I don't know what I would do. I don't know if I would run for office again. I don't know, you know, if I would support someone else. I don't know, you know, where I'm going to end up or what I'm going to end up doing, but we're going to see. Right at this moment, I'm just taking it one day at a time.
The best way I can help now is if I step aside and let government get back to governing. And therefore, that's what I'll do.
To be totally honest with you, I'm very happy about the fact that he's no longer the governor. I thought he was the most Republican Democratic governor that we had. And I feel, you know, like while a lot of people were really excited about, you know, the way he handled the pandemic and, you know, and the way he stepped up, looking at some of the things that happened over his tenure and how they impacted communities of color. I think, and when you think about the way that he, the type of climate that he created, not just with women, but just with people in general, that whole, you know, bullying and entitlement and all that other kind of stuff. I think it was time for a change, and I'm glad that things have shifted.
How does everybody feel about the new governor with her? I think she signed the Less is More Act, or what was it? She signed Less is More.
Well, I don't know her. I've met her maybe once. So far, what I've seen, we'll see. 2022 is right around the corner, so I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be throwing their hat in the race. And I think 2022 is going to be a very interesting year.
Absolutely.
I have to agree with you on that. And then in 2023, we have the city council races again, right?
Exactly, because of the city charter.
The next couple of years are going to be some very interesting times. And I don't know the current governor, didn't know Andrew Cuomo either personally. But I think that there was just too much attention being put on the wrong things, and we need to be able to just move forward. And, you know, people are struggling. They don't want to hear about all of people's indiscretions and everything like that. They want to know about what's going to happen for them. And I think that, you know, I do appreciate that it seems like the new governor seems to be interacting more with the elected officials who are here on a city local level. Mm-hmm. I have an appreciation for that. And I'm just excited to see changes. I want to see results. That's what I'm looking for. You know, I want us to, it's great for us to sign things into to law and to have everything, signed off on, but I want to see, let's start measuring results.
Right. And I agree with you because there was a lot of animosity or there was, I don't know, I want to say a pissing contest between the governor and the mayor. And I thought,
oh my goodness.
it was ridiculous. And it really hurt us in the long run. And I was really over it the first time it happened. I was actually up in Albany right after de Blasio won, and just kind of watching the interpersonal communication between the two of them. It was just like it was like,
yeah, because it's not about either one of you, right? It's about the constituents, and I gotta say, I was really disappointed about some of the leadership that allows someone to stay in office for that long and be a bully.
Yeah,
you're supposed to be a leader. I always say that people will test you to see how much you're gonna let them get away with. And clearly, if he was doing all of that, they have to take some accountability for that as well, because you let him get away with it.
Well, there's a lot of, dare I say, dead weight in office roundabout now.
Mm-hmm.
I want to point out to the audience that these women are champions. They have hit the campaign trail and they have looked people in the face and they have spoken out about, and they were trying to help the community. And if you want to run for office, you can run for office. All right. I want to thank you ladies for coming on the show. It's very educational.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you for having us.
We gotta talk. I need to call you.
Huh? Me?
We gotta talk. I need to call you.
All right. Yeah, definitely. Give me a call. You have my number, right?
I do.
Yeah.
All right. Joining me, I have Director of Community Engagement for Pennsylvania State Senator Amanda Cappelletti, Danielle Powerhouse Phillips, and she's also the founder of what is it?
PA Women Rise.
PA Women Rise, that's what it is. I also have attorney Oscar Michilen. He can be seen on Netflix. He's worked on movies like Fight for Justice, David and Me, and in the podcast Empire on Blood. He was also the attorney for former rapper and now the Honorable Shine Barrow. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
There's a lot going on here, and I just wanted to go over this stuff so the people can understand exactly what's going on. And my first question is to you, Oscar. And let me put this into context so you can answer this. The Texas state abortion law was signed May 19th. Groups including Planned Parenthood and other abortion and women health providers told the court that the law would immediately and catastrophically reduce abortion access in Texas, barring care for at least 85% of Texas abortion patients, and would likely force many abortion clinics to close. Abortion right groups filed an emergency request at the U.S. Supreme Court Monday, and obviously the court did not stay the Texas state bill. Quick question. Is this a dereliction of duty from the U.S. Supreme Court?
Well, I tell you what, it really depends on how you define dereliction of duty. So technically, was it within their procedural posture to do it this way? Yes, the Roberts Court has been taking less and less cases for argument. He has reduced the docket down to levels that we haven't seen since about 1965. So it's very, very hard to get a case to the Supreme Court to be heard for full oral argument. And more they've been using this shadow docket, which is deciding these types of issues without oral argument, sometimes issuing no decision, or as in this case, a brief decision. So was it procedurally correct? Yes, they're procedurally allowed to do that. But if you read the dissents in the case, and it was a 5-4 decision, which isn't really a surprise, with Roberts joining the 3 remaining liberal judges, it was a dereliction of duty because while the law itself might have been unable to be overturned at this time procedurally, its impact is clearly foreseeable in that it shuts off abortion rights, contrary to Roe versus Wade, at 6 weeks after conception. And so, in one fell swoop, they did what the conservative right has been trying to do for the last 50 years, which is overturn or nullify Roe versus Wade. So in that case, I see it as dereliction of duty because it's fairly obvious that this was overturning a long-standing Supreme Court precedent without even the benefit of full argument, amicus briefs, friends of the court briefing, etc. And it kind of came as a shock to everybody that the court decided not to freeze it until it could have a full hearing, and to just let it sit and stand as it is.
So the obvious intention was to get rid of a backdoor way to get rid of Roe v. Wade.
Right. What this law did is what the state could not do. If the state passed this bill, for example, and said that district attorneys could prosecute doctors or attorney generals of the state could bring lawsuits against people who aided or abetted abortions, that law would be unconstitutional because the state can't do that, in contrary to Roe versus Wade. Instead, what they did in the Texas legislature, very sneaky, very clever, but also very dangerous, is to give a private cause of action to any citizen. You don't got to live in Texas. You don't have to know anybody involved. You just have to allege that they aided or abetted an abortion in some way. You could have driven the woman to the clinic. You could have been the woman's parent and then just be giving her advice to get an abortion. And that would be enough to face a lawsuit of a minimum of $10,000 plus legal fees. So since it gave the cause of action to private citizens, it's not government action. And what the court here said was, no citizen has yet brought a lawsuit on it, so it's not right for us to act on it. We have to wait until they're sued. But in the meantime, clinics really take a great chance by continuing their work because they could be sued at a clip of $10,000 at a minimum for each abortion that's provided to any woman 6 weeks after conception. So, like you said, many clinics have said, with this law in place, we can't go forward. They would shut down. Many clinics, abortions post 6 weeks are over 95% of the abortions that they perform. So it's draconian, and in one fell swoop, it did undo the protections of Roe versus Wade for the women in Texas.
Danielle, you remember when Trump was running for office? There were so many people on the right that said, they saw his antics in the run up to him winning, and they said, you know what, Trump will never be able to do craziness. I mean, you got politicians in the House and the Senate that'll keep him in check. You had the same thing with the Supreme Court when Trump nominated these nominees. Everybody was saying, you know what, they're never going to get rid of Roe v. Wade. They don't even worry about it. So are we sure that they won't get rid of Roe v. Wade? And do you think that people on the right lied, basically, that they wouldn't get rid of it?
I personally would have said there's no way that's ever going to happen because as the Oscar pointed out, the Supreme Court only really hears like 1% of the cases that are brought to them. And there has always been a feeling that they only take like what's going to be popular. So if the tide is against certain issues, they're just not going to take it up. So for a long time, those people advocating for gay marriage, they purposely didn't want things to go to the Supreme Court because they knew the Supreme Court was not ready to hear that. They knew the Supreme Court may not go their way if it did. And so that was a strategy to keep it out of the Supreme Court. What's interesting about this law, as Oscar pointed out, and what's like frankly very confounding about it, is it's not, in some ways you can say it's not directly overturning Roe v. Wade. It's like this parallel, it's this other sneaky civil thing that they've done. So the holding of Roe v. Wade is that the government can't place an undue burden on a woman's right to have an abortion before 24 weeks. What this Texas law is doing is it's not the government necessarily placing an undue burden on a woman's right, which, I mean, eventually that's where it's going to get, right? Because if private people keep suing abortion providers, they're all going to go out of business. But it's not the government doing it, it's private people. And so the argument's going to be, it's going to be one of these weird rules of law that gets so in the weeds, as we say, and it becomes almost like its own law, where it's going to be like, okay, the holding of Roe v. Wade is the government can't place an undue burden, but we also have this civil law where, hey, actually private citizens can sue about this as much as they want. And that becomes something that's not even really constitutional law. So it becomes very confusing. And I think it becomes very confusing to explain to people not in law. And even like, I just graduated law school. It's even confusing to me, but it's almost, in a way, it's not overturning Roe. It's something else entirely. And it's something that I'd be really curious to know who cooked this up, because it was clever and it was sneaky. And and I'd love to ask Oscar this, but what's so odd about it, when I first saw it, and I think when a lot of first new lawyers saw it, was this issue of standing. Typically, you can't have any person just sue anybody for anything. They have to have something at stake. I can't go and say, oh, look at this kid in the grocery store, I think I'll sue his parents for custody. You can't do that. Like, what are you to this kid? So now in Texas, you're going to have, 28-year-old Joe, truck driver, decides to sue a clinic in Austin. He lives in Dallas. Well, what the hell does that have to do with you? That is what's extremely odd about it. And what apparently the state itself can just decide who has standing and write that into the statute. But it's just incredibly weird, because the law, it's supposed to be that you only sue for things that are injurious to yourself. Like you can't, and in the case of abortion, okay, maybe a father could argue, other than the actual woman, who can argue that they have some stake in this child's life? Maybe only the father. And I would think a lot of women's rights advocates would say, no, he doesn't, it's not his body. But
at least there's an angle, right?
There's some connection.
Yeah.
But what is just so incredibly out there, and I think not even dangerous to just Roe v. Wade, but dangerous to how we think about law in this country, is that this is going to shut down the courts. Like, the courts already cannot deal with the cases that they have. It takes years. COVID has slowed that down. People don't get relief from horrible things that have happened to them, from, victims of horrible personal injuries. And now suddenly you're just going to have, random people suing random people in other states. It's going to get so very messy and so very confusing. So I think that is what, and I think Oscar, as a law professor, would be better about explaining like just how odd this is, because it's been troubling me a little bit for people to say it's overturning Roe. That may be eventually what happens. But when I look at it from a legal lens, it seems to me that it's creating another beast entirely, which may be far more dangerous.
Yeah, you're right on the money there, because what it does is upend the normal things that lawsuits do, which is protect people who have allegedly been harmed by somebody else in some civil manner. Here, you don't even have to live in Texas, and so you don't have to have any connection to the abortion clinic. You don't have to live next door to it. You don't have to know the person who's seeking, the medical care. So it throws out the window the entire issue of standing. And what happens is, I don't want to get too in the weeds, but this all comes down to, again, it really comes down to voting rights, because the state legislatures are so important, and people don't really think about the importance of your local elections and local state legislature that impact you much more, frankly, than even the presidential election. So unless there's a change in the Texas state legislature, they have the right to say who can bring a lawsuit and who can't bring a lawsuit. They can create rules of standing. So that's a problem. As long as the state's okay with flooding the court with people who have no interest in the lawsuit, that's on the state. The federal government can't tell a state how to run its court system. The other problem that it gives is, normally, if I'm located in Houston and I have an abortion clinic in Houston, you have to sue me where the impact is in Houston, or at least maybe where the woman lives. Here, the person can pick the county where they bring the lawsuit. And once they pick the county, the county can't be changed for any reason, including inconvenience, cost, etc. So there's already talk that the lawsuits will be brought in counties the most distant from these abortion providers, so that they'll have additional cost in travel and paying for lawyers outside the county where they normally practice, etc. So that's a second change in standard civil procedure that the law brings. So it's a specific law meant to impact one particular right. So that here, a private citizen can do an act trying to prevent an abortion by making it harder for a person to get abortion by suing their abortion provider, that the state couldn't do because it would be unconstitutional for the state to do it. So the state is essentially giving a private person the right to impact a constitutional right. You can see it being extended to, for example, you could bring a lawsuit against a restaurant that refuses to integrate its restaurant. So let's say I want to have a whites only restaurant. The Texas state legislature could say, if you try to force me to integrate, there's a number of things that this can be stretched down to the extreme. But more importantly, why wouldn't every red state bring a similar law like this? If this is going to stay on the books and not be overturned, this is such a much cheaper way than to try to fight for a true change in Roe. Like in a short while now, the Supreme Court will be deciding a Mississippi law that reduces it to 15 weeks.
Right.
Okay. Now that's a battle the state's going to have to pay a lot of money. They've been fighting it for years to try to see if they can really reverse Roe versus Wade down to 15 weeks. And by the way, to get back to your initial point.
Yeah, because what I'm thinking, Oscar, is what I'm saying. It almost says to voters that this Supreme Court can't be trusted. If they're trying to backdoor to knock down Roe v. Wade, what else are they going to try to do? And not only that, is this what lawyers call activist judges or
depends on which side you're on, right? But yes, every one of these judges, raised their hand to God and said that they believe in stare decisis, in the following of judicial precedent, that they believe it's established law, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But meanwhile, both Judge Alito and Judge Thomas have said in decisions that it's time to change Roe versus Wade. They at least have been upfront about it. So they only needed, a couple of more votes to get that to happen. And so now this is an end around that doesn't make them have to make that position. So, again, they can say, wait a minute, we didn't reverse anything. We're just waiting for there to be a lawsuit that's brought. But that's nonsense.
And see, the thing that kind of bugs me as well is that they'll open up a whole nother can here. Let's say they do get around to saying that this law is unconstitutional. What about the women that went to a clinic or and maybe had a bad experience with their body or whatever, or what have you? There's a whole range of things that can happen. Are they opening up themselves to lawsuits now? Like, I don't know if the Supreme Court can be sued or,
No,
but
sir, they
wow.
can't. No, they're immune, and the state is immune from lawsuits. That's why a lawsuit can't be brought now against the state for passing the act. States are immune from lawsuits about their governmental action. So I can't bring a lawsuit that says I'm a woman who wants to have an abortion um, after 6 weeks, and this law is making it harder for me because the state is immune from that lawsuit. So you can't bring that lawsuit against the state, and you certainly can't bring a law. All judges, not just Supreme Court judges, all judges in all 50 states have judicial immunity. So that ain't going to happen.
So Danielle, what does the Biden administration do about this situation? Do they expand the courts? What do Democrats in the feds do about this?
I think that I understand the reticence to expand the courts, because what happens when you're not the party in power? And now you've expanded the courts, and now it can always go the opposite way. And there's a lot of activist organizations that take certain stance, including the ACLU, that they're not going to advocate for certain things, because what happens when the shoe's on the other foot? I think that one of the things that could have been done was put Roe v. Wade into statute form. So, for example, I think maybe Oscar can explain this better, but private people are not held to the same, like a private person can't violate your constitutional rights. Only a government agency can. However, there are federal statutes that nobody can violate without getting into trouble. I'm thinking of Title VII statutes. So for example, a private employer with like 15 or more employees is subject to the what's it called? Not the equal rights. They can't racially discriminate.
The Civil Rights Act.
Civil Rights Act. They can't racially discriminate against employees. That's in statute form. That's not something that was decided by the court. That's not something that was decided under constitutional law. It's a statute. And if you violate it as a private employer, you're going to be in trouble with an agency. They could do that, right? It wouldn't be, it would be Congress who gets together and says, we're going to put this into statute form, that any private person can't interfere with Roe v. Wade. I don't know if that solves the lawsuit issue. I think it probably does. I don't know how it would work, but to me, that's maybe a better solution than the expand the court, because when you talk about using these offensive methods, which people always criticize Democrats for not wanting to do, I think that they're always very reasonably saying, well, what happens when we're not the ones in power? All those offensive methods are open to the Republicans. But putting Roe v. Wade into statute and applying it to private people and putting it under an agency, I think provides more protections. But I definitely defer to Oscar and see what he thinks about that.
Sure. So first of all, Danielle, I've been practicing for 35 years, and I never knew as much law as I did right after I took the bar exam. So I want you to say, you know far more now than I do, because you've just studied it. You're fully loaded right now, so no need to keep deferring to me. You probably know the answer better than I do. But yes, so the problem with that is that Title VII, it dealt with that civil rights are a matter of national rights. So the federal rights, the federal government had to say that discrimination impacted commerce. And it was really through the Commerce Clause that they were able to spread that to the states. And if you impact interstate commerce, you can't violate people's civil rights and things of that nature. But so there'd have to be a decision that the right to abort, to create a specific right to abortion, which the Roe v. Wade does not really create that. It just says that the Constitution has certain privacy rights that the government should not impose upon, that are kind of layered into the Constitution. And that's often what I've said when folks are saying, we try to undo the Second Amendment. I say, well, we have to be a little bit careful because a lot of the rights that we rely on are not written in the Constitution, and they're written in judicial decisions that have created this right of privacy that we rely on to protect women's, healthcare decisions. So I think, yes, the federal legislature could, the Congress could try to enact some kind of national abortion law. I think it would be contested, by the individual states, and that's really the problem, is that
Right.
the way the Constitution is written, what it says is whatever rights aren't listed here are given to the states. So this, that's why the right is always talking about states' rights when it's convenient to them. That the state has the power, especially, by the way, over healthcare. The state is given a tremendous amount of control. So we don't even know whether a congressional bill mandating abortion rights throughout
Exactly.
the state
Exactly.
could survive.
Because it all comes back. We will have I feel like we're having these political fights over things that happened years ago. Meanwhile, we're wasting time. I mean, if this is a race who has the best infrastructure, whatever Biden is getting up there saying, climate change and all this different stuff, we're wasting time by going back trying to with these bills 50 years ago. And
These are fresh meat. This is just dangling fresh meat in front of rabid dogs. And I agree with you. That's all it is. It just gins up, the extreme sides. So I agree with that.
And in other countries, like, I lived in London for 5 years before I moved to the Philly area, and it's not abortion is not a debate there. It's no longer a topic of political conversation. I think there was something in Ireland, but in England, it's done. It's settled. You don't have, when you're talking about elections there, they don't talk about this.
No.
They don't. And I think, they're not as religious as we are. I think a big part of that is religion, is that the right now is heavily associated with Christianity. And so we still are having fights, which, as you're right, like it wastes our opportunities to really deal with important things like Medicare for all, infrastructure. I mean, we have society crumbling around us, and we're sitting here squabbling about things like abortion and, who has basic human rights. It's totally ridiculous. It's interesting because you brought up Trump. Trump never really had anything to say about abortion, as far as I know. I don't remember him really saying one thing or the other about it.
He did say that he wanted, and I couldn't believe he said this, but he said it. He said he wanted the kind of justices that will overturn Roe v. Wade.
Okay.
Eventually, that's the position he eventually landed on. And, initially he was kind of neutral about it. He had said in some interviews that he was pro-choice. He's from New York. It's a pro-choice state. He agrees with that. But when he saw which side of the Republican Party was supporting him, that it was the far right of the far right were his biggest supporters, that he really made a U-turn and did say, I will appoint judges that will overturn Roe versus Wade. And, we know what his position is because look who he appointed. I mean, he appointed judges who clearly have Roe versus Wade in their sights.
And let's not be fooled here, because I think sometimes the Democratic Party, we take the Republican Party way too lightly. We take them and they'll say, you know what, they'll never get rid of Roe v. Wade, or they'll never do this, or they'll never do that. And look what happened. We're suffering from the effects of Donald Trump's legacy. And you talk about chaos. He ran on chaos. And these judges now, who I think deserve to be looked at with scrutiny, I think they deserve any type of political look that they get, because they dove in the middle of politics when they didn't make this decision. They could have easily, put a stay on this, right?
Yeah, granted a stay and said, let's determine whether it's constitutional.
Absolutely.
They knew what they were doing. These are not, look, we may disagree with them, but these are not, dumb people. So no one who signed that decision didn't say, gee, I wonder if this is going to impact abortion. Okay. They knew what they were doing by signing onto it that way. And by the way, if they didn't, they only had to read the 4 dissenting opinions, particularly Justice Sotomayor, who never pulls any punches, to say, this is ridiculous. You're overturning, you're essentially nullifying, not overturning, but you're neutralizing Roe versus Wade for the women of Texas. And so, we shouldn't be so naive as to think that, hey, what do you want? My hands are tied. I just had to follow these laws. First of all, you're the Supreme Court of the United States. You could have done what the dissents decided to do and put a stay and then let it get fought out in the court. And instead, again, in one fell swoop, they ended abortion essentially in Texas because, 6 weeks. I mean, that, many women don't really know that they're pregnant. Nationwide, like you said at the beginning, that covers over 85% of abortion procedures. And as I said, some Texas clinics cited statistics that show it's over 90% of the procedures that they perform are within that time period.
So
they knew exactly what they were doing.
Is the statute the only defense, if you will, that the administration has right now? Is that the only thing that we can try to implement to stop this if we have a court that does decide to try to do something crazy?
Yeah, you mean yes. All the federal government can do is if someone files a lawsuit, they can file briefs in support of whatever, person brings an action to overturn the law. Federal government can't really change a state law. So there's not much that the Biden administration can do directly to impact this bill. It's funny, like, for example, why do all states have a 55-mile-per-hour speed limit? Because the federal government says, we won't give you federal money if you don't have a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. So perhaps the federal government could say, could they restrict, for example, Medicare, reimbursement? Could they somehow tie it economically to say, if you restrict abortion rights, we won't send certain federal monies? I mean, I think even that would be up to constitutional scrutiny. But other than that, I really don't see a way for the administration to directly try to overturn this law. It's got to come from within the state of Texas first. So
if they attempted to make a federal Roe v. Wade statute, I mean, they wouldn't have to justify it unless it was challenged, right?
Right, but the state would challenge it to say that we're the ones who should be making the decisions about healthcare for the citizens of our state. That's the problem under the 10th Amendment.
But it wouldn't be that challenge wouldn't happen until the states took them to court, right?
Right. But I bet you that would be an injunction against the enactment. I bet you that you would get 5 judges to say this new law that the feds passed violates the state's rights, so we're going to enjoin it until we get a full argument. Then you get the injunction on that.
Right.
But but believe me, I know that the Biden administration, the Justice Department, are looking at ways to try to turn this around. And the far bigger concern is that more states will follow this line, and we'll really have a two-tier abortion system in the United States where, a good 12 or 13 states have very restricted means. Because before this, they were doing other things. So this is just the latest step. They were passing laws that a medical clinic, that an abortion provider had to have a hospital privilege within a hospital within X miles of its location. That eliminated in states like Louisiana and Alabama almost 80% of abortion providers. So in certain states, there's only 3 or 4 places that women can go to get an abortion because of these other rules that they put in place, supposedly to protect the health of the woman. But in fact, it was just to limit access to women. So this is just the latest step in a way to get around Roe. It's the most creative and the most dangerous, but this has just been the pattern. And the reason why it brings people to the voting booth. Let's just be honest.
Right, absolutely.
That's what it is. It's red meat. It brings people to the voting booth.
Hey, look, real quickly, I just want to touch on this January 6th thing. And from a lawyer's standpoint, and I know you mentioned the DOJ, and some people think that the DOJ is moving at a snail's pace right now. Now, I don't know what that I don't know from a lawyer standpoint what that means. But there's a lot of people that are trying to bring political pressure, trying to make it seem as if January 6th did not happen. Now, based on what you saw at that Capitol, what do you think the DOJ should be doing about that case, generally speaking, that they're not doing?
Yeah, I'm already kind of disappointed, frankly, at some of the quick pleas and relatively minor dispositions that have been given to some of the Capitol insurrectionists. But I really think that they need to continue to make sure to bring criminal action against everybody that was responsible. But more importantly, to see whether anybody within the political structure assisted the invasion of the Capitol. And the other thing that it just shocks me, and I think part of the problem is that from the previous administration, a lot of people left DOJ. They didn't want any part of that administration. That's been true about the intelligence agencies, the EPA. They had a big brain drain over the last 4 years. So this just happened in January 6th. So the Biden administration has not even been able to fill the many positions it needs to fill in order to get itself fully up to speed. And this is a massive investigation.
Absolutely.
And prosecution. So I think they have to take their time in a sense to sort things out. I do believe that obviously there's different layers of involvement. Some people were just there. Some people breached the Capitol. Some people planned it. Some people assaulted police officers. So there's different layers of that. But the most important thing is I would try to keep this out in the public dialogue. As they find out more information, we should be sharing that information. Now we're going to have a congressional investigation, hopefully, and that'll provide information. But
well, let me ask you about the also the investigation going on with Donald Trump. Do you think that that investigation is moving too slow?
No, I mean, I think that in New York, it's heating up a little bit. But again, these are investigations that take time. When the federal government brings a federal complaint, brings a criminal action against you, their investigation is complete. It's not like a state criminal investigation where a crime occurs, they arrest you, and then they bring the witnesses in and figure out how they're going to prove it. By the time the federal government brings an action against you, they're ready for trial. Okay, they're done. They file an indictment. It lists everything that they have on you, and then they give you the discovery material in short order, and you're ready to go. So
quickly,
they don't leave any stone unturned. So it always takes time.
What does it look like? What does it appear to be in your estimation? What do you think, just by the looks of it? I think it was his second man was arrested. What does it look like to you that's going on?
Oh no, I mean, it looks like people are providing information. They're at that stage where they're charging people. and then bringing people in and saying, look, you could be a target, you could be a suspect, or you could be a witness. You gotta decide. So I certainly think folks are cooperating, against him. And the government is trying to find direct connection as opposed to, oh, he had to know, he must have known, he should have known. I think they want to show that he had, greater information as to what his political campaign was doing with the funds and things of that nature. So, and here, for example, you see that, they brought a cause of action about, paying for college and things of that nature for his right-hand man. I think that's just the first step to get somebody into court, kind of like the way they went after Al Capone over tax evasion, and I think what's happening here is that there's likely folks cooperating to try to get more information and bring different types of claims against them.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you, Oscar Michilen, and I want to thank Danielle Powerhouse Phillips for being here. You uncovered some things for us to think about. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Always good talking about it. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.